Folks, it just happened. Mark Carney just made a move that has Washington absolutely spiraling right now. While Trump was busy threatening Canada with his tariff tantrums, our Prime Minister was playing chess on a completely different board. And let me tell you, what just went down in the last 24 hours is going to change everything about how Canada does business in the 21st century. Manitoba just opened a trade office in India, but this isn't just some provincial feel-good announcement. This is Canada sending a message to the world, and more importantly, sending a message to Washington that we are done being held hostage by their economic bullying. And the timing? Absolutely perfect. Carney knew exactly what he was doing. So here's what went down. On May 20th, Manitoba announced they're establishing a dedicated trade relations office in India. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's nice. Provinces open trade offices all the time. But listen to the language they used. The provincial government explicitly stated this move is designed to reduce economic vulnerabilities and over-reliance on the American market due to shifting American policies. They didn't dance around it. They didn't use diplomatic language. They straight up said, we're doing this because we can't trust the United States anymore. That's unprecedented honesty from a Canadian government body, and it should tell you everything you need to know about where we're at right now. But it gets better. Just hours after that announcement, Mark Carney stood in front of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade and laid out the most ambitious vision for Canadian independence that we've seen in decades. He announced plans to literally double Canada's non-American exports. Double them. He's talking about deepening ties with India, with Southeast Asia, expanding our energy sector, our critical minerals projects, building infrastructure specifically designed to get Canadian goods to Asian markets. And here's the part that's going to make you smile. Carney didn't mention Trump by name once, not once, but every single word of that speech was aimed directly at Washington. He kept emphasizing Canada as a stable partner, a trusted nation in an unpredictable world. Who do you think he was contrasting us with? He was telling the world that while America lurches from crisis to crisis, from tariff threat to tariff threat, Canada is here, we're reliable, and we're open for business. Now let me explain why this move is absolutely brilliant and why Trump and his cronies are probably having an absolute meltdown in the White House right now. For decades, Canada has been economically dependent on the United States. About 75% of our exports go south of the border. That's given Washington enormous leverage over us. Every time they wanted something, every time they wanted to renegotiate a deal, every time they wanted us to bend on some policy issue, they could threaten our economy. They could threaten tariffs, they could threaten trade restrictions, and we'd have to listen because we didn't have alternatives. Trump has been exploiting this for years. He slapped tariffs on our steel and aluminum. He called us a national security threat. Can you believe that? Canada, America's closest ally, a national security threat. He threatened to tear up NAFTA unless we gave him everything he wanted. He's treated Canada like some kind of economic colony that exists purely to serve American interests. And what Carney just did is call that bluff. He's saying, fine, you want to play hardball? You want to threaten us? We're going to build an economy that doesn't need you as much. We're going to find other partners. And you know what's beautiful about this? India is desperate for what Canada has. India's economy is growing faster than almost anywhere on Earth. They've got over 1 billion people. They need energy. We've got energy. They need critical minerals for technology and manufacturing. We've got some of the largest reserves in the world. They need stable, reliable trade partners who won't use tariffs as a political weapon. That's us. Let's dig deeper into this Manitoba announcement because the details here are fascinating, and they reveal just how serious Canada is about this pivot. Manitoba's new trade representative in India isn't just going to be sitting in an office handing out brochures. Their mandate is crystal clear. Strengthen connections with Indian businesses and government. Gather market intelligence so Manitoba companies know exactly what opportunities exist, attract direct investment from Indian firms into Manitoba, and report concrete results back home. This is a fully funded, fully staffed operation with one goal: get Manitoba businesses competing in global markets and reduce their vulnerability to American policy chaos. The provincial government looked at what happened over the last few years, the tariffs, the uncertainty, the constant threats, and they said enough. We're not putting all our eggs in the American basket anymore. And think about what this means for other provinces. Manitoba just set a precedent. If Manitoba can open a trade office in India to diversify away from American dependence, what's stopping Ontario from doing the same? What's stopping British Columbia, Alberta, Quebec? This could be the beginning of a nationwide movement where every province starts building these alternative trade relationships. Can you imagine the panic in Washington when they realize that Canada isn't just talking about diversification at the federal level? Provinces are independently making moves to reduce American economic influence. That's a nightmare scenario for anyone in the United States who wants to maintain leverage over Canada. Now, Carney's speech in Vancouver laid out the roadmap for how this all fits together at the federal level. And trust me, this is where it gets really exciting. He talked about doubling non-American exports. Think about what that means practically. If we currently send about 25% of our exports to countries other than the United States, Carney wants that to hit 50%. That's a massive reorientation of the Canadian economy. That means new shipping routes, new trade agreements, new partnerships, new infrastructure. And he was specific about infrastructure. He talked about improving Canada's access to Asian markets. That means ports on the West Coast. That means rail lines. That means pipelines for energy exports. He's talking about building the physical capacity for Canada to ship goods across the Pacific as easily as we currently ship them across the border. The energy sector piece is huge. Canada has some of the largest oil reserves on the planet. We've got natural gas. We've got uranium. We've got hydroelectric capacity. For years, we've been trying to sell most of that to the United States, and they've jerked us around constantly. Pipeline approvals get blocked, prices get manipulated, they act like they're doing us a favor by buying our resources. India and Southeast Asia don't have that attitude. They need energy desperately. They're building their economies, they're industrializing, they'll pay fair market prices, and they'll sign long-term agreements because they need supply security. Carney sees that opportunity and he's going after it. Same thing with critical minerals. The world is transitioning to electric vehicles, to renewable energy, to advanced technology. All of that requires rare earth elements, lithium, cobalt, nickel. Canada has enormous deposits of these minerals. China currently dominates the global market for processing these materials, and countries like India are desperate to find alternative suppliers so they're not dependent on Beijing. That's Canada's opening. We can be the reliable Western democratic supplier of the minerals that will power the 21st century economy. And Carney clearly understands that positioning. Here's what makes this whole situation so deliciously ironic. Trump thought he could bully Canada into submission with tariff threats. He thought he could use America's economic size to force us into worse trade deals. He thought Canada had no choice but to accept whatever terms Washington dictated. And instead, what happened? He pushed Canada into the arms of the rest of the world. He made diversification a political imperative. He gave Canadian politicians the perfect justification to invest billions in building trade relationships with Asia, with Europe, with Latin America, with Africa. Before Trump's tariff nonsense, if a Canadian politician proposed spending massive amounts of money to reduce trade dependence on the United States, people would have asked why. The relationship worked well enough. Why rock the boat? But after years of tariff threats, after being called a national security threat, after watching Trump tear up trade agreements on a whim, Canadians get it now. We understand viscerally that we can't rely on the United States the way we used to. Trump created the political will for exactly the kind of policy Carney is now implementing. And here's the kicker. Once these trade relationships are built, once Canadian companies have established supply chains into India and Southeast Asia, once we've built the infrastructure to ship across the Pacific, that doesn't just go away. Even if the United States tries to improve relations, even if they try to offer Canada better deals, we'll have alternatives. We'll have leverage. Trump wanted leverage over Canada. What he actually did was eliminate America's leverage over Canada. That's a historic strategic blunder, and I don't think Washington has fully realized it yet. Let me zoom out for a second, because what's happening here is part of a bigger global trend, and Canada is positioning itself perfectly to take advantage of it. Countries around the world are reassessing their dependence on both the United States and China. They're looking for what people call the middle power strategy. They want reliable partners who won't use trade as a weapon, who won't suddenly impose tariffs for political reasons, who operate on rules-based international systems. Canada fits that description perfectly. Carney kept emphasizing in his speech that Canada is stable, that we're trusted, that we're predictable. In a world where the United States is becoming increasingly erratic and China is becoming increasingly aggressive. That's exactly what countries want. What India is the perfect example. India has border tensions with China. They don't want to be economically dependent on Beijing, right? But they've also watched how Trump treats allies, and they're nervous about putting all their trust in Washington. Canada offers a third option. We're a Western democracy with strong institutions, but we're not going to use our trade relationships to push around smaller countries. The same logic applies to Southeast Asian nations, to European countries trying to reduce dependence on both American and Chinese supply chains, to Latin American countries tired of being in America's backyard. Canada can be the partner they're looking for, and Carney is making sure the whole world knows we're available. Now, you might be wondering, okay, this all sounds great strategically, but what does it actually mean for me? How does Manitoba opening a trade office in India affect my life? Let me break it down. More export markets means more jobs. If Canadian companies can sell to India, to Southeast Asia, to new markets around the world, they need to produce more. That means hiring more workers. That means better job security because companies aren't dependent on a single market that could disappear if Washington decides to impose tariffs. It means better prices. When Canada is overly dependent on the United States, American companies can dictate terms. They know we don't have anywhere else to sell. But if a Canadian energy company can sell to India or Japan or South Korea just as easily as to the United States, suddenly American buyers have to compete. They have to offer fair prices. That's better for Canadian producers, and ultimately that money flows through the whole economy. It means more stability. One of the most stressful things about the Trump era for Canadians was the constant uncertainty. Would there be new tariffs tomorrow? Would NAFTA get torn up? Would we wake up to some tweet threatening the Canadian economy? If Canada's economy is diversified globally, if we're not dependent on Washington's mood swings, ordinary Canadians don't have to live with that anxiety. And it means more respect. Let's be honest, the way the United States has treated Canada over the last few years has been humiliating at times, being called a national security threat, having our steel and aluminum tariffed, being bullied in trade negotiations. When Canada has economic alternatives, when we're not desperate for American market access, we can negotiate as equals. We can demand the respect we deserve. Now, I want to talk about how Washington is likely responding to this because I guarantee you they're paying attention and they're not happy. For decades, American policymakers took Canada for granted. They assumed we'd always be there, always be dependent, always be willing to accept whatever terms they offered because we had no choice. This Manitoba announcement, this Carney speech, that assumption just got shattered. There are probably people in the State Department and the Commerce Department right now trying to figure out how to respond. Do they try to offer Canada better trade terms to keep us in the American orbit? Do they threaten more tariffs to try to punish us for diversifying? Do they just accept that the relationship is changing? Here's the problem they face. If they offer better terms now, it looks like weakness. It looks like Canada can just threaten to trade with other countries and America will fold. But if they don't offer better terms, if they keep up the tariff threats and the bullying, they're just going to accelerate Canada's pivot to Asia. It's a lose-lose situation for Washington, and it's entirely of their own making. They had a willing partner in Canada, they had a neighbor that was happy to maintain close economic ties, and they abused that relationship so badly that we're now actively looking for exits. I would love to be a fly on the wall in some of these meetings. You know, there are American officials who understand that they've made a massive strategic error. Canada isn't just some small country they can push around. We're the second largest country on Earth by land area. We've got massive natural resources, we've got a highly educated workforce, we've got strong institutions, and we're now offering all of that to America's competitors. So where does this go from here? What should we expect over the next few months and years as Canada pursues this diversification strategy? First, expect more announcements like the Manitoba Trade Office. I would not be surprised if within the next few months we see Ontario opening a trade office in India or Southeast Asia, British Columbia expanding its Asian presence, Alberta looking for new energy customers. This is going to become a trend. Second, expect major infrastructure announcements. If Carney is serious about doubling non-American exports, Canada needs the physical capacity to move goods to new markets. That means port expansions, rail improvements, potentially new pipelines for energy exports to the Pacific. These are multi-billion-dollar projects, and they create thousands of jobs. Third, expect new trade agreements. Canada is probably already in negotiations with India for a comprehensive trade deal. We'll likely see movement on deeper integration with Southeast Asian trade blocs. Possibly new agreements with European countries looking to diversify their own supply chains. Fourth, and this is important, Expect pushback from the United States. Washington is not going to watch Canada pivot to Asia without trying to interfere. They might offer carrots, better trade terms, promises of more stable policy, or they might use sticks, tariff threats, pressure on specific industries. Carney and the Canadian government need to stay strong and not be swayed. Fifth, expect this to become a major political issue in Canada. There will be voices, probably funded or influenced by American interests, arguing that we're abandoning our most important relationship, that we're taking unnecessary risks, that we should just give Washington what it wants. Canadians need to see through that. This diversification is about our long-term sovereignty and prosperity. Let me step back and talk about what this really represents, because I think it's even bigger than trade policy. For the entire history of modern Canada, we've lived in America's shadow. We've been the smaller neighbor, the dependent partner, the country that ultimately had to defer to Washington on major issues because we needed them more than they needed us. What Carney is doing, what Manitoba is doing, what this whole diversification strategy represents, is Canada stepping out of that shadow. It's Canada saying, we're going to be a sovereign nation that makes our own choices, that builds our own relationships, that doesn't need permission from Washington to pursue our own interests. This is about dignity. This is about respect. This is about future generations of Canadians growing up in a country that isn't economically subservient to the United States. And here's what gives me hope. This isn't just government policy. Canadian businesses are hungry for this. They're tired of being jerked around by American tariffs and policy uncertainty. They want access to growing markets in Asia. They want to diversify their customer base. There's real momentum behind this from the private sector, not just from politicians. The Canadian people are ready for this too. After years of watching Trump insult us, threaten us, and treat us like some kind of American vassal state, Canadians are done. Poll after poll shows Canadians want a more independent foreign policy and trade policy. Carney is giving voice to what the country already feels. I want to spend a moment on why India specifically is such a smart focus for this diversification strategy, because the timing here is absolutely perfect. India is on track to become the world's third largest economy within the next decade. They've got a population of 1.4 billion people. Their middle class is exploding. They need everything Canada has: energy, food, minerals, technology, education services, you name it. But here's the key thing. India is also trying to reduce its dependence on China. They've had military clashes on their border. They've watched China use economic leverage as a political weapon against other countries. India wants alternative partners, and they want partners they can trust. Canada and India are natural allies in so many ways. We're both democracies. We're both part of the Commonwealth. We've got a massive Indian diaspora in Canada that creates people-to-people connections. We don't have territorial disputes. We don't have historical grievances. We can build a relationship based purely on mutual benefit, and unlike the United States, Canada isn't going to demand that India pick sides in some new Cold War. We're not going to threaten India with tariffs if they don't vote the way we want at the United Nations. We can offer a partnership based on respect and equality. From India's perspective, that's incredibly attractive, and from Canada's perspective, getting in on the ground floor of India's economic rise is the opportunity of the century. If anyone from the American government happens to be watching this, and I hope they are, let me say this directly. You did this to yourselves. Canada didn't want to diversify away from the American market. It was working fine for us. We were happy to be your closest ally and partner, but you couldn't help yourselves. You had to insult us. You had to threaten us. You had to treat us like we were some kind of problem instead of an asset. You called us a national security threat to justify tariffs on our steel and aluminum. Do you have any idea how offensive that is? Canada has fought alongside the United States in every major conflict for over a century. Canadian soldiers died on beaches in Normandy. We were in Afghanistan. We're in NORAD together. And you call us a security threat? You threatened to destroy our auto industry unless we gave you better terms in NAFTA. You used our economic dependence as a weapon against us. You thought we'd just take it because we had no choice. Well, congratulations. You've created a choice. You've pushed Canada to build exactly the kind of alternative relationships that will reduce your leverage over us. And once those relationships are built, once that infrastructure is in place, you can't just undo it by being nice for a few years. This is the consequence of treating your closest ally with contempt. Enjoy watching Canada's trade flow to India, to Southeast Asia, to anywhere that treats us with the basic respect you couldn't be bothered to show. Folks, what we're witnessing right now is a turning point in Canadian history. This isn't just about trade offices or export numbers. This is about Canada claiming its place in the world as an independent nation that doesn't need to ask permission from Washington to pursue its own interests. Mark Carney gets it. The Manitoba government gets it, and I think the Canadian people get it too. We're done being taken for granted. We're done being bullied. We're done waiting for the United States to decide whether they're going to treat us like an ally or like an adversary. We're going to build an economy that's diversified, that's resilient, that gives us options. We're going to build relationships with countries that respect us, and we're going to do it whether Washington likes it or not. The India Trade Office that Manitoba just opened isn't just a provincial initiative. It's a declaration of independence. It's Canada telling the world we're open for business and we're not going to let anyone, not even the United States, limit our potential. This is exciting. This is historic. And if you're a Canadian watching this, you should feel proud. Our government is finally standing up for our interests, finally building the kind of independent foreign and economic policy that a country like Canada deserves. So watch this space. Watch for more announcements. Watch for more provinces opening trade offices. Watch for infrastructure investments. Watch for new trade deals. This is just the beginning. Oh, and I'm Edward Baroni with the Canada Ledger, where we cover Canadian politics from a perspective that actually puts Canada first. Imagine that. Trump wanted to make America great again by pushing around its allies. Instead, he's making Canada great by forcing us to become independent. Thanks for that, Donald. We'll send you a postcard from Mumbai.